I love technology. I'm Dr. Will Horton, and this is a seminar on addictions. A little bit of an update on some of the current information that's out there and some of the stuff that we're finding out. Considered by many to be one of the world's leading NLP trainers and hypnosis trainers, and I'm the #1 addiction resource for several of the hypnosis organizations and several of the NLP groups and things like that. So I'd like to just get us started and let's have some fun with this. The first thing I'd like to do is just tell you that, you know, addictions treatments is an old school method. It hasn't really changed much in 50, 60 years. I wrote the book, The Alcohol and Addiction Solution, and I started bringing in the brain-based stuff and some of that. Well, basically, there's just several little schools of thought. There's the medical model, right? People have the medical model. It's a disease concept, which, has to do with genetics. That's kind of good. There's research that back all of these up. The 12-step method, which is really the only true treatment for addiction that has long-term efficacy through time and with testing. It has some difficulties, as people find out, but it's one of the best out there. Then you have the psychological model, that it's more of a psychological issue, addictions, based on upbringing, situation, things like that. The social model, that people think it's mostly a social issue. Excuse me. The behavior model, or the behavioral model, that it's more of a behavior to be modified. That's where a thing that used to be pretty popular called, where they moderate your drinking. Temperate drinking strategies, what was taught for a while. Risk reduction therapy. That's a behavior model. Then there's the sin model, that it's basically a flaw in your character where it's a sin. I'm going to turn off the camera because this is not doing well. All right. So anyway, let's have some fun with this because, that's the old school method and, there's some truth to it, right? But these are old school ideas. They basically fail in the 21st century because there's new biological information, right? Coming up about the biology and the brain-based model with neurochemicals and all this stuff that's coming up. And basically, not that the disease concept might not be good, but it's an outdated disease concept, right? And then I began doing some research that shook my world, right? I'm an old school 12-step guy. As a lot of people know, I'm still active at basically 31 years. I'll have been sober 31 years on St. Patrick's Day. Good day for an Irishman to sober up, right? But I'm still active. I chair meetings. I go to groups. I have a bunch of friends. And I love it. But what changed? Well, the longer I was around and the longer I am around, the more I realized there may be some challenges with the model, that this is the only way. When I first got into the addiction world, it was the only way. And then people started to challenge it, and there's all this other stuff. But what changed? Well, #1, science and facts are paramount to me, right? But old beliefs die hard. I mean, you could use all kinds of things. I mean, there's the whole thing about, that there's still people believe that eggs are bad for you, right? Why? It was based on a flawed study in the 70s, just like meat, but that's another thing. But, it's not true. The science doesn't back it up, and the science actually counteracts it, right? And I knew something was off. I just knew something was off, and to do this, I had to be open to change, and I preach change. As a scientist, we always talk about change, right? So then, and there's a lot of this. Let me go back a little bit. There was a commercial done, I think it was in the 70s, and it showed some rats in a cage. And, they're one rat in each cage. And it shows them like drinking this cocaine-laced water, if I remember right. And then basically the voiceover with a nice deep voice was, there's one drug that given the choice, the animals will ignore everything. Food, water, but basically, that, and they'll do this drug until they die, right? And the drug was cocaine, and then this kind of spread out to other drugs, right? That, that it was, the drugs were the evil bad thing or something, or the alcohol, things like that. And that study's kind of been duplicated, I guess, a few times with alcohol and other drugs, and it seems to be true. Well, what really happened, though, and a guy has, saw some problems with it. Well, first of all, the rats were alone in a cage with absolutely no stimulation. They were terrified. They were unhappy rats, right? And so he wondered what would happen if you took these rats that have been, doing cocaine or whatever the drug was. They were doing it. They were like, freaking out over it and all that stuff. What if you took these rats, these unhappy rats, and put them in a happy place, right? What I mean by that is a place with other rats, good things to do, different foods, all this other stuff, right? Well, what happened was the happy rats would refrain from using the drugs over 90% of the time, the 90% of the rats, right? Which kind of goes back to more of the biological model that some people are just like more biologically thing about being an addict, right? And this kind of coincided, the way I heard it was the guy was wondering because the results from Vietnam. And what I mean by that, a lot of the Vietnam vets coming back, and it seems to be being duplicated with the current wars. Vietnam vets in Vietnam were like smoking a lot of dope, doing heroin, drinking a lot. And when they came back, there's going to be an epidemic of heroin abuse and more the addictions and things like that. Well, what happened was most of the veterans could readjust, right? They readjusted just fine. Then again, you had the 10% that would probably not readjust or stay with the addiction, which kind of flew in the face of, is it the drugs? Is it the alcohol? Well, alcohol is a great study, and you hear me talk about alcohol a lot because you can buy it anywhere, almost anywhere in the United States. There's a few dry counties here and there, but it's prevalent. Cocaine's cheaper than it's ever been before, right? And then they people have wondered why when, in Amsterdam, when they turned their back on marijuana, basically, did the addiction go through the roof? No, right? It was confined to a place. Certain people would do it, but not anymore. So basically, I call it the happy rat syndrome, where if you put people in a happy place, they're less likely to use. And a lot of people will use when they're unhappy. And let me give you the box example. If you can imagine some boxes, right? And then you put people in a box, there's 20% that never use, right? Now, if you take out children that have never been exposed to it yet, right? But these are adults. There's a certain subgroup of the population just never use. They won't drink, they won't get high, they won't do anything. Why? They just don't. Not that they never did, not that this. Could be religious reason, could be health, could be they just don't like it, right? But then what happens, and let's say we take a kid, they've never used, and then they experiment, right? They experiment. It's natural. This is something that always fights with people. You can't stop people from experimenting with things that people want to do, right? And then they may go into casual use. Most people fall into the casual use thing, right? They will drink occasionally, if the other, maybe they're an occasional marijuana user, right? Casual use. Why do they, let's use alcohol again. Why? Well, alcohol loosens the inhibitions. You have more fun. It's whatever. It tastes good sometimes, right? It fits things. It's part of our culture. And most people will casually use, right? But then what happens? You get another box, a small group, they'll get into substance abuse. Now, what do I mean by substance abuse? It means they drink or drug or do whatever the substance is abusively. When there's negative consequence, maybe family members are mad or they've had a couple of issues at work or something like that. Well, these people will abuse the substance in spite of the negative consequence, right? Now, what's interesting, there are other situations where people will go into the abuse situation because they're the unhappy rats, right? They're not doing well. They're sad. Again, going back to Vietnam, these guys were in a horrible situation. They were in a war they didn't understand. The American public didn't support it, yada, yada, yada. So people would escape. This is also where you see people, another example, guys go to college. People go to college. They party, these frats or whatever. They party their brains out for 2, 3, 4 years while they're in college. Some people would do it when they join the military. And they party, they drink a lot, right? Well, they're in the substance abuse scale area in that box. But guess what? They leave that situation, whether it's college, whether it's something bad, like in the military, people maybe go through a divorce or something that's painful, and they're in that substance abuse part. But then if they readjust and they get to be happy rats, get in a better place, that they just don't use. And guess what? Going against everything that I was taught for all those years, a lot of those people can go back and become casual users. Because in the 12-step world, we used to always say, well, once you're a pickle, you'll never become a cucumber again, right? But then what happens, though, of that little box of 20, say about 20% of people, it might be in substance abuse, about 10% of those are going to stay dependent. That's the difference. They're using in spite of negative consequences, but they don't stop no matter what. There is no happy place you could put them. When they'll stop abusing the substance, whether it's alcohol, cocaine, marijuana, whatever it is, even some of the other things, gambling, sex, all that, right? They stay in this dependent mode. This is the addict mode. And really what happens is it's more of, your brain's been hijacked, right? You got a chemical malfunction in your brain, right? Because once, it was only thought that you would move downward. If you went into the abuse, then you became dependent, you could never go back upward. Well, situational abuse may never become addiction, right? They're sad, they're freaked out, maybe they're drinking too much or doing something to do that, and then they quit, right? Again, this kind of makes sense, because every once in a while, if people really get honest, they look at these really strong painkillers like Oxycontin, things like that. Guy breaks his back, he gets Oxycontin. Oh my God, he's going to be an addict for life. Guess what? Most people don't. Once their back gets better, once they get over the pain, and they get the drug out of their system, they're fine, right? And situational abusers may moderate back. You see that with people, they drink too much, they get in a bad situation. They can have a drink, right? Or, maybe smoke a joint. But if you're one of the 10% that your brain's been hijacked, you're screwed. You're stuck, right? And it's brain-based. It's genetic, right? And there's a book, I can't remember the name of it, but it had it's like chocolate and cocaine, right? But sugar and chocolate, right? A lot of people can eat a lot of sugar or they love chocolate. It doesn't mean they all become diabetic, right? They just don't. Some people, they'll become diabetic quickly. They start eating too much sugar, they're going to become diabetic. Other people, no. It's something with their pancreas. It's the luck of the genetic draw. It's kind of like you got a bad brain. I'm sorry. It's like I got blonde hair and blue eyes. That was the genetic draw. I could try to change it. I could dye my hair. I could wear contacts, but that's just what is. I'm not 6'2", no matter how much I want it to be, right? So some of those are just the genetics. And if you've got that in your system, whether it's in your liver, whether it's in your brain, whether it's in all of the above, it begins to happen. And this is where you get the stories of people that there's a situation, they're in the guys from Vietnam. I knew several people. They said, yeah, they were mainlining heroin in Vietnam, staying drunk the whole time. They came back. They used a little bit. They got a job. They settled down. They just never did it. They would occasionally stop after work for a beer. I knew a lot of guys like that in the 70s when I first got out of the military. And I remember there was a guy when I was on active duty, I think 74, 75, and he had been in a POW in Vietnam, and he was a wreck, man. He was a wreck. And, he came out right at the end of the war, and, the Army got put in our unit, and the Army's trying to take care of him, right? And, he was drunk, wouldn't show up, do this, and everybody's like, well, we got to work with the guy. So anyway, and I remember some of the old guys saying, well, we'll just see, they were going to ship him off to treatment and all that. And they kept, well, we'll see, and he reunited with his wife. He did get some counseling. But then one day it was like literally he just woke up, and, he was just Sergeant so-and-so. Of course, they promoted him to Sergeant First Class, and then that he had some health issues too, but it was like he became happy, when he reunited with his family and his wife, and he was around people that understood. A lot of the guys Most guys my had just been in country, and it was just wow. It was fine. He leveled out, right? Went against everything, right? Didn't want to get high, drink, or do much anymore. You'd see him have a beer at like a retirement party, or sometimes we'd have it, when celebrating things. But he would stop. Now me, I was the opposite. I would never stop. Now my brain's been hijacked. I'm Irish and American Indian. Certain subgroups seem to have it, right? So this is why the 12 steps may fail. This is why the 12 steps may fail. My dogs are barking. It's great for those with clinical addictions, but do you need it for life? That's the question, right? And 12 steps are also great to get situational abusers happy, adjusted. They dry them out, they get adjusted, they get happy. And those people, do they need to go to AA forever? In the original stuff that Bill Wilson and the founders of AA talked about, maybe they understood something that got lost, which was AA was meant to be a bridge back to normal living, is what they said, right? And some of the people would become a lifestyle. A lot of people go to church. Not everybody wants to be a priest, right? Or a minister or anything, right? Or get real active in the church, right? And maybe that's the key, right? So this shook my world, and it's changed how I treat addictions, right? So our mission then is to get the info and decide, are they situational, if they're showing up saying they're drinking too much, or are they clinical type, right? Right? And then we can help them to get happy. And there's some things that hypnosis and NLP does that resets brain chemistry, and I talk about this in some of my trainings that, meditation resets brain chemistry. Other things reset brain chemistry. Hypnosis, some of the NLP techniques, right? And then we can teach them new skills, right? Sometimes it's, people have to learn the new skills, how to cope, Again, this is something we're seeing happening with veterans. Coming back, they just need to relearn new skills, Behavior that's appropriate, as we all know, behavior that's appropriate in one place is not appropriate somewhere else, right? And we can just help them to get happy. So I just wanted to give an update on this, just a fast, fun update, and talk about some upcoming trainings. I'm redoing the addiction courses. April 8th, it's a live training in Miami Beach, Florida. In late April, I'll be doing an online addiction course, and it's the Up to Addiction 2015. I have my alcoholaddictionsolution.com that has modules. And what it'll be is I'll just redo those, I'll update those, and it'll be, Alcohol and Addiction Solution 2.0 probably, things like that, because information changes. As the information changes, we should adapt our strategies. We shouldn't stay stuck. No one wants to go to a heart doctor that was great in the 1950s and says, well, it worked then, it'll still work now. Well, it might work, but there are better ways to do it. So you could call for live trainings of the detail, training details. Where it is, it's over in the Miami Beach area. Coral Gables, I think, is where we're having it. I'll give more information at nfnlp.com, or you can call me at 941-408-8551. It's going to be a limited class, small class. These are people, for hypnotists, NLPers, psychologists, social workers, that may not have a strong background in addiction, that want a different site. Also, I do know a couple alcohol and drug counselors said they may come because they just want to hear different things. Because, again, as Tony Robbins says, Brian Burchard, Deepak Chopra, Wayne Dyer, they said one of the things you notice about the elite people across the board in every field, they go to other trainings. They update their information. They take classes. So I'd like to thank you for being a part of this. And if you have any questions, give me a call. And I look forward to seeing you. And if you can get to the live trainings, I hope you're there. If not, sign up for the 2.0. If you were in the old one, of course, it'll be dirt cheap for the upgrade. And if you've never taken it, maybe you want to jump in when the new one's offered and take it from scratch. I'd like to thank you for being a part of this. And I look forward to seeing you as we trudge the road to happy destiny.